Hey guys, welcome back. It is your favorite GIMP of the month, and I'm here with a prototype for you. This is called Iron Thunder. This is by Chiswick Games. Now, what I am showing you right now is definitely prototype, 100% prototype. Nothing is indicative of final components. Make sure you keep that in mind. Like some of these miniatures are 3D printed out just as filler pieces for now. So when I'm talking about the components of the game, make sure you keep that in mind, that everything is subject to change. None of it's final. These pieces aren't going to be 3D printed. Again, they're just stand-ins for the moment. So what Iron Thunder is a World War II miniatures skirmish type game. And the best example I can think to give you is Company of Heroes Light. Okay, so if any of you guys have seen the Company of Heroes board game, very expansive, you have tanks and infantry and all the other stuff all spread across the board. This is similar to that in the way that it plays, but it's a lighter version of it. Obviously, two separate companies though, two separate everything. They're not patterned off of that or anything like that, but they are similar in that regard. So when it comes to the game itself, you're going to have your board here, which does not operate off of hexes or squares like we've seen in other games. This actually has octagons and small little diamonds or squares, depending on which way you look at it, in between them. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more later on, but it is different. All the spaces on the board are not the same size. As you can see here, we have one of the little diamonds right there in the center, but then it's surrounded by 4 octagons. Also, when we're looking at our components, obviously we have our tanks and units. All the infantry are just little infantry pieces, and the tanks are going to vary between light, medium, heavy, and then a tank destroyer of some type. Now, the version that I have here just has the 2 factions, so US and German, but the rulebook does show that there are British and Russian units as well. So I'm not entirely sure what the Kickstarter will launch with when it has all the different types of units, if the others are going to be stretch goals or add-ons, or how that's going to be handled, but there are plans for more than just US and German. Now, the other pieces that you see on the board, we do have terrain pieces that change. There's winter side and forest side, but you notice there are 2 different sizes of these. So we have the big ones, which will go in the octagons, and then little ones here that go in the squares, and they both do relatively the same thing. They just occupy either the small or the large spaces. When it comes to both sides, we do have the base. All right, so think of this as like your headquarters. If you take out the enemy headquarters, you win. We have the US one and the German one, and they each have their little health track on the side that's going to be kept track of with these little red cubes. And they start at 3 and go on down as they take damage, or they can be occupied by enemy infantry forces to be taken out that way as well. Now, where I start comparing this to Company of Heroes is when these other buildings get into play. You see there's like factories and oil derricks and towns, and they each produce a little something different. Notice they have the same circle sizes that the headquarters do, and they each have a set of health for them because these can be destroyed as well. So our towns here produce command points, our oil derricks produce fuel, and our factories produce both command points or fuel. So you can pick which one of those you want. So in game terms, for you to actually control this, you have to have it occupied with your infantry. And it can be occupied by up to 1 infantry. So if you place, boom, infantry there, you have gained control of this. And during your resource phase, you will gain whatever resource is listed. So when it comes to the units, the infantry are just represented as basic infantry. There is a potential for different type of infantry, I think, later on, but my prototype kit doesn't have any of that stuff. So I'll reference those a little bit more when we talk about this. But these are the cards that represent all the different types of armored units. So like I said, again, you got light, medium, heavy, and the tank destroyer ones. So when we're looking at these, this is the Panzer II, I believe. Yep, Panzer II. And on the left side, we've got health. Again, 3 health bars for it. Infantry all only have 1 health, so if an infantry is killed, it's just taken off the board. Tanks can take damage, which you're going to keep track of here. And then if you run out of health, boom, tank dies. The neat part is right here to the right of that is a experience point track. So as they destroy enemy units, you'll take another red cube and keep track of that, and they can end up increasing their experience, so to speak, as you go on with the game. And that actually does have a gameplay effect when it comes to rolling the dice, because the dice do have little stars represented on them that will allow them to do extra damage if they have the right amount of experience. Now on here, we've got our little spot where we keep shells and a spot where we keep fuel, and each one of the tanks is going to have this. So to represent that your tank has shells, you're going to keep your extra ones right here, these little tokens, and then if it's loaded and able to fire its main gun, then you're going to have an armored shell right there. And your units will run out of these as the game progresses, and you're going to have to restock them, right? So that's something you have to keep track of. Its defense armor rating is listed down here. So we see with the light tank, this little Panzer II, it's got an armor value of 0 on its front and its side, but the others do have more armor. Looking here for the fuel, when you move a unit, it will require the expenditure of fuel. So each time you're moving this tank, you're going to have to spend these fuel tokens. Now, that is not per hex or per octagon that you move into. And bear with me if I say hex, because I'm so used to saying hex, but I'm referencing the octagons in this game. But that refers to each time they move. So if you move this Panzer II during its turn, you'll pull off a fuel token and it'll do whatever movement it's going to do. But to move it during its turn, to spend action points moving it, you're going to have a fuel token to spend. Now, looking on the right side here, we see its stats. The little symbol represents the light tank. This number here in that little chevron looking shape is its action points. So that's how many action points it has to spend each turn doing things like moving and shooting. And then we have its range listed down right below that, which range gets kind of a little wonky. I'll touch on that later, but for this, understand that it can basically reach out to a hex of, or an octagon rather, 1 away. So equal to or under that number is whatever its range is going to be. And then the dice are color coded on how strong they are, and it's easy one to understand. Green's the weakest, then you have yellow, and then red as the most powerful. So depending on how strong their gun is, determines what die they're going to roll when performing an attack. And as you would expect, that's going to change depending on what unit you're using. Our Stug here is our tank destroyer, and it's going to have a red die because it's got a big gun, but again, no turret, so it doesn't get to use that. But you see it uses 2 fuel when it moves, so you have to spend more fuel resources to keep these guys moving, but it has less action points, a little bit farther range. We've got our medium here, which is represented by the Panther. 1 frontal armor, no side, same as the Stug, and it doesn't require as much fuel, but only throws a yellow die, has a little bit less range. Medium amount of action points to spend with its 4. And then our heavy is represented by our Tiger here. It also takes 2 fuel to move, but throws the biggest die, the red die. Has 2 frontal armor, only 1 side armor, which is still pretty good. All of these have a consideration of 0 for their back armor. Range of up to 2, only 3 action points though, so the heavy ones don't move very far. When we're looking at our American units, they're going to be represented by the M6 as the heavy, the M4 Sherman as the medium, the M10 as the tank destroyer, and the Chaffee as the light tank. So this here is our player board. And think of this as kind of like your resource board. This is where you're going to buy new supplies and keep track of how many orders that you have to spend each turn. I'll touch on it in just a sec, but each turn you're going to roll on the white die, and that'll tell you how many flags you get, and that's how many orders you get to spend. When we're buying units during our resource phase, though, these command tokens are used to purchase whatever it is that we're getting. So you will get these command tokens, again, from things like towns that you have control of. And you'll gather those during your resource phase, and you'll be able to spend them to gain infantry. This references special infantry, which are not in the prototype kit that I have, so I don't have as much information on those. Or here you can use a command token to get some cards, because there are cards that you can use in the game, and they have the same type of effect. I'll show you guys some of them here in just a minute. But they give you, special abilities, kind of let you break the game rules. To replace armored units, it takes 3 command tokens. You can spend 1 here to gain 2 ammo tokens, so you'll place those there. You can spend 1 here to gain a fuel, 1 here to gain a fuel, so put your fuel tokens there. And then there's also the ability to get repair kits, and you can use those to repair damage that your tanks get. Because if you get a tank that has 2-3 experience on it and it's able to chalk out that little bit more damage, you want to keep that tank running. Now, no matter how much you control on the board, though, you're only going to be able to have 5 of these command point tokens. So you can't just stock up a whole bunch of them. You can only have 5 to spend on each resource phase. And you see here, the Germans have the same type of resource board to use. All right, so how the game's gonna play, you're gonna set up, and there's going to be a back and forth between each player, rolling off to determine who's going to get first choice. So whoever gets to pick their spot to put their command post down, the other player will place theirs, and then you go back and forth placing your different units up until you start the game. When you're placing out your units to deploy them, you're going to place them within 2 large hexes of your main base, okay? So you don't really worry about these small squares. It's only the big ones that you're going to count. And if you're counting out diagonally like this, so the US base is here, first major octagon, hex, I keep wanting to say hex, bear with me, and then the second one. So our range for deployment will go out to here, even though we're crossing 2 of these small ones as well. Just remember, range is always going to be counted in the large ones. Now, when you're deploying your units, again, your tanks, your heavy units can only be placed in octagons, and your infantry can go in both, but formations can't go in the small squares. Only the single infantry can go in these small squares. And you can deploy your infantry however you want. So you can group them up to 3, or you can have them in individuals or 2. There are advantages when it comes to combat by having your infantry in the same hex when they're attacking. Obviously, they're going to get throw more dice. You can even split up your attack, so they can attack adjacent enemies. You could have 2 infantry attack into 1 hex and 1 infantry attack into a different hex. You can spread it out, attack in the same direction, whichever way you want to go with it. But if they take an attack, all the units are going to be hit that are in the same octagon. And it goes back and forth a little bit. So a single enemy infantry, let me grab you, sorry buddy, here, their attack could only hit 1 of these infantry, but a tank unit can hit all of the infantry. So that's where you have to start making choices and be careful with your formations. All right, so like I was saying, you will start out using your custom die. There are 3, the yellow, green, and red that I talked about before, and then this white one. The white one is the weather die and the order die, okay? So you'll roll it, and depending on what it rolls, here's a 4. If it's a 3, you're gonna have bad weather. If you have a 4 or 5 on here, you're gonna have normal, okay weather. And if you have a 6, you're gonna have exceptionally good weather. That'll determine what happens. You'll have certain bonuses or negative modifiers just depending on the weather. But here, this also tells us the number of orders each side is going to have during the game. Now, this isn't a typical 12-sided die with up to 12. It's got a varying number of 3s, 4s, 5s, and I think just a single 6 on here, and that determines your orders. Again, you're going to keep track of your orders with your little flags. So you'll take your flag and place them out on your resource board here, if I can get them all to stand up. And each side will do this at the start of the phase. and we know we have that many to spend. So you would spend a flag if the US side was going first to order a formation or armored unit or infantry, whichever unit, to perform their set of actions with their set amount of action points. And then the opponent will go, then you go, opponent go, back and forth until each side has run out of their flags. With infantry, it's pretty easy to understand. Again, they only get 2 action points. So you can spend an action point to attack, or you can spend an action point to move. It does cost more depending on certain types of terrain. Armored vehicles can't enter the forested or the snow drifts octagons, with the exception of the light ones. The light ones can, considering they're lighter, they can kind of move through the trees. But once you commit an attack, your turn is over. So even if you have some action points left to spend, once that unit has conducted an attack, they're just done. So as an example, let's say our US side's going first here. They could spend an order to move this infantry here into this I'm just going to call them hexes because I'll never remember. Sorry, guys. Into this town hex, and they gain control of it. Remember, you only get points for ones that you have infantry in, and you're going to leave these flags located here next to the units. That way it reminds you that you have taken control of that and you have spent an order here. There are some types of special actions like a charge, consider that like getting in close, hooking and jabbing, that type of stuff. If you charge with infantry, that they can end up having to spend 2 flags instead, but generally it's just going to cost you 1 for the different actions that you do. All right, so let's say, again, it's now our German turn and they want to move their light tank here up and get him stuck in. Again, our light tank has 5 action points. So you could spend 1 to pivot the tank to go this way because they are going to point in whatever direction of the octagon they're going. That does matter when it comes to attacks coming in and the attacks that they're sending out. They can pivot their turret though. All of these turrets do spin. So if you want to face this way and shoot this way, you are allowed to do that. But let's just say he wants to move up. So he spends 1 action point to pivot, 2, 3, 4, and 5. He races up onto the Sherman, even though that's a very bad idea, but we'll just do it for example. And he has spent his 5 action points to get up close to this Sherman so he can try to attack him on a different turn. Now, once you have placed a flag next to a unit though, again, we go back to our original side. So we're going back and forth, but you can't double up flags. So I can't go to this US unit and now do something else with them. Or when it's the Germans' turn, I can't do another action with this tank, okay? Since he's already got a flag on him. Short of some type of card giving me an exception to that rule, once they've got a flag, they're done for that phase. They don't get to do it until we get to our end phase where we pull all the flags back up off the board. And just to give an example of an attack, let's say our Sherman here wants to attack. He's right here. He does have 4 action points, so we could move or do something else. But let's just say we want to go ahead and attack. So we're going to attack. That would cost us 1 of our ammo points, right? We already had 1 loaded, but now we no longer have 1 loaded. So later on, we would have to spend an action point to reload this tank. But we can't do it now because we're shooting with it. So it'd be on the following turn. So we would roll our die and see what we got. Unfortunately, we got a miss on that one, so nothing was done. And these are prototype dice, so bear with me. But you guys can see that's 2 damage, that's 2 damage, another 2. I'm trying to find one. Okay. This, if you guys see those tiny little stars on the sides, that's where experience points come into play. So this one, for an example, is 3 experience points, 3 little stars. Sorry, again, they are hard to see, but these are prototype components. Let me go to one that's actually easier to see. Here we go. This one has a single hit and 2 experience stars, okay? So you get the single hit, all right? So let's say, just as an example, that we rolled this. He would get the single damage on that, and you would subtract any armor from the damage before you apply it. Our Panzer here does not have any armor, so 1 damage would be going through. But as an example, let's say that our Sherman was at experience level 2, right? So he wasn't basic, he was experience level 2. If your experience level is equal to or greater than the stars that are on the die, you get to add 1 damage to the attack. That's why it's important to keep the tanks that you have that experience with, because they do more damage. And there are faces on the die that just have those little stars and no damage. So you can potentially change a miss into actually getting damage done. But if he were that and had rolled 1 damage and 2 stars, he would actually do 2 damage instead of just 1. And again, you would just come over here and keep track of it on your board like that and drop it down to where the Panzer II only had a single point remaining. Now, each side's going to go back and forth like that until a set number of turns, or you destroy the enemy's base or capture it, just depending on which version of the game that you play. There are different versions. You can do Blitz, where you're not worrying about things like fuel, or which is just going to make the game a little bit easier to play, because like I actually did forget, when we moved our Panzer II, we had to remove a thing of fuel from it. But again, just 1 for moving him all that distance. You only move 1 fuel for the turn, not 1 fuel for each one that you move through. So yeah, as I was saying, there's Blitz, where you don't have to worry about resources like fuel and ammo, the realistic, where you worry about everything, or the attrition version of the game, which has a set time limit. And just to show you guys some examples of some of the cards that we have things like Marksman here. The target infantry gains 2 range for the duration of the turn. Range is measured in the tiles of the same type as the infantry is standing on. But you see that actually costs a command point, so you have to spend resources for some of these cards. And there are other cards that have a black and yellow border to it, and these can actually be played as kind of like an interrupt, either before or right after an enemy attack. So this one, like Bailout, if the next attack destroys your armored unit, replace it with an infantry. Bailout can be played after the attack is resolved, but cannot be played if your unit is destroyed in a charge. So again, the type of attack where you ram in there on them. And for this one, though, it's not just a command point, it's a command point and a flag that you have to spend. So effectively, that unit is spent when they get charged like that. But that happens anyway when it comes to charges, because if they charge in, both sides are allowed to attack in the charge. But both sides do have to spend a flag. So even if you're defending, you're going to spend an org flag just like the attacker's doing. Okay, so that's the down and dirty basics of the game. There are some more specifics to it, but that's the general highlights of it. I wanted to go over a few different things when it came to the game, stuff that I like, stuff that I don't like as much when it comes to it, just to kind of inform you. One of the things that does stand out to me, and I do like, is the different size of hexes. Okay, so the fact that we've got octagons and squares, because you don't see unusual sizes like this used very often. Almost everything is hexes, and the stuff that's not hexes is squares. All right. So being able to have stuff like this where it's octagons, it gives you more directions that your tanks can be facing in, plus having I keep wanting to say hexes, but spaces on the board where only certain units can go into it. It's a smaller section of the battlefield, so only just a little bit of infantry can go there, but an infantry unit there can attack all those hexes around it. So one unit can guard all of these different spaces. It kind of changes things up. It gives a different feel to the gameplay rather than just the same old hex, 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 hex all across the board. Of course, I like minis, because who doesn't like minis? You can paint them up. They look cool on the board. Don't get me wrong. I love chits too. There's good and bad for both, but who doesn't like seeing just minis on the board? You gotta love that. I do like the fact that the infantry can act independently. So you can give an order here having just one of the infantry. So you can break up these formations if you want to, or you can create formations on the fly. If a unit's next to it, they can move in and join with a group. It changes the dynamic up. So you don't have to have either all singles or all together. You can kind of make your own choices on how you want to do it. I'd set up the US forces over here with a couple of big formations, but set up the German forces where their infantry were kind of spread all along in this just wide defensive formation to kind of block out the whole thing. Two different strategies to try out. I also like the faster pace of it and the way the I go, you go works. I tend not to prefer as much games that'll have one side act with all of their units and then the other side act with all of their units, because it's kind of like 40K. Whoever gets to go first gets such a big advantage, especially if they've got like long range cannons or something like that, that they get all their attacks off and then only half the enemy force is left at that point to be able to come back. The first side has a big advantage. Although on the flip side, if the game has shorter ranges and you go all with one side moving first, then they're basically having to move into range, at which side whoever goes second gets to do all the shooting first, and then it goes in their favor. So when you have move a unit, move a unit, move a unit, move a unit, I always prefer that. I also do like the resource management phase that we have going on here, because you're having to make those difficult choices. Is it going to be better for you to save up and get a tank? Is it going to be better for you to put that money towards infantry? Is it going to be better for you to try to get repair kits? But then through all of that, you're going to need fuel and ammo to keep your guys going. They're not going to be able to do squat on the board if they don't have those resources. But then again, maybe you need to hold on to some of those command points because you've got a good card in your hand that you want to spend. So I like those difficult choices that you have, and the fact that you have to spend those command points here if you want to get extra cards. Maybe your opponent spends those points towards a tank and you spend yours towards a couple of cards, but those cards play out for you. Or maybe they don't, and then you wish you had saved up and got the tank instead. So this aspect I really do like over here. And it's kind of the same thing with the order flags as well. Anything that gives a random nature, okay? So you're not going to know exactly how many order flags you're going to have each turn. It's going to be anywhere between 3 and 6. So you might move a lot of units the next turn, or you might not. So you can't really plan out a strategy. You know your basic, you know your minimum. I'll get at least this, but maybe I'm hoping for this. And one of the biggest things that I liked is the thing that I'm having the hardest time showing, just because the prototype nature of the die thing, those little stars, right? The experience levels to the units. I really like that. The fact that they're not going to be the same, like they're going to level up. So each time you're destroying an enemy unit, it's not damaging, but destroy an enemy unit. Doesn't matter how many you destroy. So let's say our Panzer here destroyed 2 units, but destroyed them in the same turn. They're only going to get a single experience point. So you can only gain 1 a turn no matter how many you wipe out. But that changes it, because this little Panzer II becomes a lot more powerful at experience level 3 than it does when it has no experience, because that means anytime you roll those little stars on those die, you are adding an extra +1 to your damage. Your die attacks become that much stronger when you have those experience points. So in that case, it would behoove you to keep a lighter tank alive than get a bigger tank, because his gun's actually gotten that much more powerful. All right, so there are a couple things that I don't like about this, and the biggest one I gotta say is the sameness of the units. I would have liked to have seen different stats. The light, medium, heavy, and tank destroyers of each different side, they had the exact same stats. So there is no difference between the Chaffee and the Panzer II, between the Sherman and the Panther, between the M6 and the Tiger. You know, they're all the same as far as what they're going to do. The heavy on each side is going to consume 2 fuel, red die, range of 2, 3 action points. That's what it's going to have. 2 armor, 1 on the side. I'm hoping that is a placeholder and that might change up, because I would like to see something like the Tiger maybe have a little bit extra range, maybe a point more armor, maybe it's 2 and 2, something along those lines, but maybe it's exorbitantly slow, takes 3 fuel to move. You have to dump a buttload of fuel in it to keep it going on the board, or maybe it's got a point extra health. Something like that I think would work a little bit better, because at this point, it doesn't really matter whether or not you've got US units, German units, Soviets, British. They're all the same effectively, and it's just the coloration that's different. There is a part in the rule book on the next one, and this is kind of the same point. It talks about how infantry have range 0. They can only fire adjacent to them, but that's contrary to the way the rest of them are explained out. The rest of the ranges, so for our armored units, are all the way you would understand for range to be explained. You know, they have a range of 1, so range out around them, whatever is adjacent. But infantry, it's referenced as 0. I think that just needs to be changed and say range 1, because it's effectively the same thing. And what that comes down to is basically the same point. I think the rulebook at its current stage just needs a little more fleshing out, a little more designing before it's finalized. But this is an earlier stage prototype, so that's to be expected. I would expect it to not be completely ready at this point, so I can't really hold it against them that it's not wholly fleshed out yet. The only other thing I would say right now is the special infantry thing, and that's just because I don't know about them yet. With it being a prototype and those not being in-game just yet, I don't know what to say about these. So I'll let you guys know more about those later on. So yeah, that wraps me up as far as Iron Thunder goes. I like what I see so far. I think it's close. We're kind of in our beta stage right now. Again, I can't hold anything to them as far as components are concerned, because this is prototype components and all that good happy jazz. But there is a fair amount going for it. Like I was saying, I like the different size hexes and squares, changing up the way you're going to move across the battlefield. And I really like the way the experience system and the stars work as far as the units, changing them up to where they can gain a little more power. If they changed it up to where the units aren't the exact same for each faction, it would go much higher in my book. And I think this one would definitely be a standout. But right now, I can't say for sure, because I don't know if those are just placeholder stats or if they are going to change. If I find out one way or the other, I will put it down in the comments and let you guys know. So yeah, Iron Thunder, if you guys are looking for something that is similar to Company of Heroes, but a much smaller, much easier to get to the table footprint, yeah, Iron Thunder is one to definitely look at. So if you like that, you like what you've seen over there, but it's just such a hassle, because I gotta say, that was one of the drawbacks to Company of Heroes, is it was so big, so cumbersome, so many parts for it, that it was kind of hard to get that game to the table. You really had to be ready for it, because it's going to be there for a little bit. This one you can set up in a very short amount of time, get a game in, get it all packed up. I mean, it's an evening fun activity versus days worth of time you have to put in for Company. All right, but that's going to be it for this one. You guys put down any questions or comments you have down below, and I will try to answer them. And I will try to get just a little bit more information on this game as it continues to develop. All right, you guys take care. I'll see you in the next one.